The late July heat pressed against the windows of Mrs. Ellington's living room as the Maplewood Book Club members filed in one by one, settling into the circle of overstuffed armchairs and folding chairs arranged around a low, lacquered coffee table. Outside, crickets droned in the long grass of her backyard, but inside, the air conditioning struggled to quell the muggy breeze that drifted through a cracked open window. Lemonade sweated in tall glasses on a side table, among platters of buttered scones and petite cucumber sandwiches. The room smelled of vanilla candles, old paperbacks, and the soft perfume Mrs. Ellington favored, jasmine and eucalyptus. At precisely 7:03 p.m., Mrs. Janet Reynolds rose to her feet, clearing her throat. The group, 19 avid readers ranging from schoolteacher Miss Martinez to retiree Mr. Carver, fell silent, eyes trained on her clipboard. Woman of punctuality and poise, Janet tapped a pen against her notes. "Friends," she began, voice warm but determined, "we all love our monthly deep dives into history, politics, and memoir, but truth be told, these last few summers, the discussion slump has nearly wilted us." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the circle. A slender woman in her 60s, Mrs. Ellington herself, nodded gravely from her favorite floral armchair. She tucked a curl of silver hair behind her ear. I can't remember the last time someone finished a 600-page biography without dozing off halfway through," she confessed, prompting a soft laugh. At the back, Ms. Eleanor Cleary, the club's quiet librarian, listened with measured interest. She sat ramrod straight, hands folded in her lap, a pale cardigan over a modest navy dress. Tonight she wore no brooch, no flashy jewelry, nothing to hint at the fact that she had just 2 years ago stood on the stage of the National Press Club in Washington to accept a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative memoir. No one here knew that. Janet ran a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. "So," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I propose we vote tonight to ban all nonfiction titles until September. We'll dive into lighter fare, escaping to Regency England, distant galaxies, anything but the real world for a while." Silence settled, the kind that hovered before a thunderclap. Miss Martinez cleared her throat. "But how will we sustain our lively debates? How will we challenge each other's thinking?" Several heads nodded in concern, while others shifted restlessly, imagining a summer without spirited discussion of real events. Across the circle, Mr. Carver, a retired history professor, tapped his cane. "I admit I relish the intellectual stretch," he said, voice gravelly, "but I will survive a few weeks reading something less demanding." Janet smiled, sensing the tide of opinion. She tapped her pen again. "All in favor of shelving nonfiction until autumn, say aye." A chorus of ayes rose from 12 throats, their voices bright with relief. 5 murmured nay, and 2 voices hesitated, leaving the motion to pass. Janet lowered her clipboard, triumphant. "Motion carried. Nonfiction is banned until September." She clapped once, and the room erupted into a mix of cheers and nervous laughter. The first to speak was Mrs. Ellington herself. "Wonderful," she said, voice a touch shaky. "My paperback of Persuasion will see me through July and August with nary a heavy footnote in sight." She leaned back, sipping her lemonade. At the mention of Persuasion, Ms. Cleary's eyes flickered. Jane Austen had once stirred her soul as deeply as any modern exposé. But she kept her expression still, allowing the mood to settle into jubilant anticipation rather than uneasy foreboding. As conversation turned to possible fiction picks, romantic comedies, space operas, historical fantasies, Eleanor slipped out quietly through the side door into the library's quiet back hallway, her heart fluttering. She pressed her palm to the cool brick wall, closing her eyes. Inside the alcove, stacked behind locked glass doors, lay her own memoir, Shadows of Truth, and the gleaming Pulitzer medal. She drew a soft breath, the weight of her secret pressing at her shoulders. Soon these arms would hold a book as weighty as any banned tome. Returning to the living room, she placed a gentle hand on her stack of borrowed novels, light beach reads, clever mysteries with whimsical sleuths. She smiled at Janet, offered congratulations, and said, "I look forward to a summer of pure escape." Her voice sounded calm even to her own ears. As the meeting adjourned, members gathered their copies of The Princess Diaries, Space Maiden, and Murder at the Manor. They exchanged eager grins and promises to return, with thoughts on witty banter and cliffhangers. Only Mrs. Cleary lingered at the shelves, her fingers drifting over the non-fiction spines now consigned to the back corner. History, politics, memoir, all hidden away until September. Outside, the cicadas droned louder in the night. Eleanor locked the door behind the last departing car and paused beneath the lamp outside the library's entrance. She looked up at the silent stacks within. The fall nonfiction blitz felt both inevitable and postponed, a reckoning delayed. Tucking her cardigan closer around her, she whispered to the empty night, "Just 2 more months." Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the pavement, the hush of her Pulitzer-guarded secret blending with the summer's stillness. Monday morning found the Maplewood Public Library stirring to life under a pale lavender dawn. Dew clung to the magnolia blossoms just outside the tall glass entrance, and the broad stone steps glowed faintly in the soft light. Inside, the air smelled of polished oak shelves, fresh printed periodicals, and the faint, reassuring musk of well-loved volumes. Dust motes floated lazily above the circulation desk, each catching the glow of the overhead fluorescents, as if they were golden motes of knowledge themselves. At precisely 8:30 a.m., the library doors unlocked with a gentle click. Ms. Eleanor Cleary, white-haired, slight of figure, spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose, stepped across the threshold. She carried no tote bag this morning, only her own quiet dignity and the carefully concealed secret of her Pulitzer Prize. Her cardigan, the softest shade of dove gray, brushed the curve of her skirt as she made her customary circuit. Locks to check, lights to switch on, reservations list to review. Her steps were light, honed by 20 years of guiding patrons through these aisles. Behind the reference desk, in the cavernous center of the library, Eleanor slid into her chair and turned on her computer. The nonfiction section, rows and rows of books on history, science, memoir, and politics, lay directly behind her. Under normal circumstances, she would prepare to answer a dozen questions before the morning's end. Where are the travel guides? Can I see your early European history section? Do you have any recent biographies of women in science? But this week was different. The Maplewood Book Club's decision to ban nonfiction for 2 months had cast a pall over her shelves, and she anticipated that few would even dare approach the reference desk with those once common queries. Her first patron of the day arrived promptly at 9 a.m., Mrs. Kowalski, a retired school counselor who came every Monday for the latest congressional proceedings. She paused at the desk, peering uncertainly at Eleanor. "Good morning," she said, voice tentative. Just wondering if you have the latest volume on the Treaty of Versailles. She trailed off, glancing at the fiction displays that crowded the foreground. Eleanor forced a polite smile, though her heart stung. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Kowalski. The book club's summer ban has discouraged nonfiction checkouts. We've removed the display case for the next 2 months, but the books remain on the shelves." She gestured toward the tall, quiet stacks. "If you'd like, I can pull the volume for you." Mrs. Kowalski hesitated, embarrassment tightening her hands around her handbag. "Oh, no, that's quite all right," she said, the smile strained. "I'll come back in September." And with that, she shuffled away, leaving Eleanor gazing after her retreating cardigans. By mid-morning, that scenario repeated itself 3 more times. A college student seeking research on climate change turned at the reference desk with a sigh. A young father, clutching a library card in his toddler's hand, weighed whether to request a real book about space exploration or defer to the colorful picture books spotlighted at the entrance. Each time, Eleanor offered to retrieve the nonfiction title. But each time, the patrons shook their head and slipped back into the aisles of fantasy and romance. At 11:15, after the lunch crowd had dispersed, Eleanor found a moment to slip away from the desk. She crossed to the far corner of the nonfiction section, where the recessed lighting haloed her memoir, Shadows of Truth, displayed behind locked glass. It stood on an easel beside her Pulitzer Prize, the metal gleaming like a solitary star against the dark velvet of its case. She reached out, fingertips brushing the cool glass, and allowed herself a single quiet breath. Behind that door, unknown to the book club, unknown to nearly everyone, lay her life's work. Dozens of meticulously researched chapters chronicling her investigation into a long-buried local scandal, and the lonely nights she spent chasing down every witness, every newspaper clipping, every faded photograph. The Pulitzer, with its simple engraving and gleaming edge, was a testament to the difference that nonfiction could make, exposing injustice, giving voice to the voiceless, forging connections between individual stories and the broader human tapestry. As she closed the glass door, Her reflection merged with the rows of nonfiction tomes behind her. Each spine, the rise and fall of the industrialists, memoirs of a civil rights heroine, the science of pandemics, held the promise of knowledge, the potential to transform a reader's understanding of the world. Without these books, she felt a hollowness settle in her chest. Returning to the reference desk, Eleanor steeled herself. The afternoon would bring an onslaught of chit-chat about romance novels, detective mysteries, and space operas, none of which, she knew, would spark the same urgent curiosity in the hearts of her patrons. She tapped the search bar on her screen, hesitated, and then typed, Maplewood Book Club Contact. The cursor blinked. She could send an email, quietly suggest a guest speaker, or even volunteer to lead a nonfiction discussion. But first, she needed to see the book club's reaction to their own decree. The computer pinged with new email, a notice from the library director, forwarding the book club's press release about the nonfiction ban. Great community engagement, it read in warm type. Had anyone considered the consequences? Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She deleted the notice with a soft click, then opened the digital calendar to schedule time for her own research. She would need to gather evidence, perhaps an anonymous letter or a discreet invitation, to remind the club why nonfiction mattered. The afternoon sun shifted, casting long, dove-gray shadows across the tiled floor. Eleanor adjusted the stack of fiction paperbacks on her desk, straightening their spines so perfectly they formed a small wall between her and the nonfiction stacks. She sighed, settled back in her chair, and waited for the next patron, ready at any moment to pull the curtain back on the truth that nonfiction alone could reveal. The following Wednesday evening, Mrs. Ellington's living room felt strangely hollow. The windows were open, but no summer breeze stirred the wisteria on the porch. The overhead fan, set to low, stirred only stale, heated air. At the center of the room, the usual circle of overstuffed chairs and folding seats held the Maplewood Book Club's 18 members, one short this week. And for the first time since the ban, none of them looked comfortable. Mrs. Ellington herself sat in her favorite floral armchair, legs crossed, a half-finished paperback romance novel, The Duchess's Dilemma, lying closed in her lap. She watched as Janet Reynolds, the club president, rifled through her clipboard, flipping hastily past the next two fiction titles. All right, Janet said, voice quivering more than she intended. We're here to discuss Starlight Escape, but I think we should address the elephant in the room. A breathless hush fell. Even the cicada chorus outside paused, as though curious about what would come next. Miss Martinez, clutching her unopened copy of the Regency courtship tale, raised a tentative hand. Janet, with respect, I'm not getting anything out of these meetings. We used to debate themes, critique authorial voice, challenge each other's perspectives. She glanced around, others nodded, eyes downcast. Now I feel like I'm missing a vital part of what made this club unique. A ripple of agreement spread. Mr. Carver, the retired history professor, cleared his throat. I find myself longing for the analytical depth of nonfiction. Memoirs, true crime, exposés. Without those, our discussions feel superficial. He tapped the spine of his detective thriller, Murder Beneath the Stars, as though it were mocking him. Across the circle, young Mr. Nguyen, always quick with a quip, looked almost forlorn. I thought I'd get lost in a fun mystery, but I keep drifting back to the documentary on unsolved shipwrecks I watched last summer. I want more than fictional suspense. I want to understand real human stories. Janet swallowed. She had expected a few dissenters, but this wave of disenchantment was deeper than any she'd anticipated. She rubbed her temples, desperate. I thought we needed a break from heavy subjects. But it seems we've lost our critical spark. She glanced at the empty chair where Miss Cleary would have sat, her small figure unobtrusive, but her presence always reassuring. Maybe our ban went too far. Before any further debate could ensue, the door opened and Mrs. Patel slipped in, late and flustered. She set a heaping plate of freshly baked brownies on the coffee table. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, offering a weak smile. Traffic was a nightmare, and then I couldn't find Starlight Escape anywhere. Her eyes flicked to the fiction stack on the table. I checked the library website, nonfiction section is closed. Never mind. She sank into a chair, glancing around as though expecting someone to tell her nonchalantly that this had all been a prank. Silence settled again. Finally, Janet rose and faced the group. It's clear we underestimated how much nonfiction fuels our curiosity. We need to restore balance. She paused, voice firming as she found her footing. We will vote tonight to reinstate nonfiction. Recommendations are open. Let's reclaim what made us a vibrant club. A cheer rippled through the circle, hesitant at first but growing loud. Mrs. Ellington allowed herself a small, relieved smile. She reached for her old leather tote and pulled out a stack of library slips. I'll start with the biographies I've been saving, she announced, holding up the first, from Cotton Fields to Capitol Hill. Even Miss Martinez's eyes brightened as she retrieved her well-worn copy of the Feminist Chronicles. The energy in the room shifted as though the club had breathed its first true breath in 2 months. Meanwhile, at the Maplewood Public Library the next morning, the void left by the book club's ban showed in every quiet aisle. At the reference desk, Miss Cleary sat behind her computer, the glow of the screen lighting her thoughtful expression. She watched, small victories blooming in her chest, as the first visitors in days approached the nonfiction stacks again. A college student named Claire stumbled up, eyes lighting, when she found the battered climate change treatise she'd been forced to abandon. A father with 2 curious children asked for the latest book on space exploration, his voice animated as he spoke of potential careers for his toddlers. Mrs. Kowalski, the retired counselor, returned with gusto to the Treaty of Versailles volume, her earlier embarrassment forgotten. Cleary moved through the aisles, pulling books for patrons with practiced ease and warm encouragement. When Claire asked for other titles on environmental justice, Eleanor's face brightened. I have just the thing, she said, leading Claire to a shelf that bore her own memoir, Shadows of Truth, framed behind glass. Claire gasped and peered at the Pulitzer Prize medal beside it. You wrote this? She whispered. Cleary removed the book from its case and handed it to Claire. Yes, and I know what those real-world stories can do. She smiled, genuine and unguarded. I'm glad you're here to read them. As the morning sun climbed higher, the library's nonfiction section thrummed with renewed life. Stacks shifted, chairs scraped against tile as readers gathered, and the quiet turned rich with the turning of pages. And at the heart of it, behind the reference desk, Eleanor Cleary felt a deep satisfaction. Nonfiction was alive again in Maplewood, ready to inspire, challenge, and connect the curious minds who came seeking truth beyond the page. The August dusk settled over Maplewood like a lazy cat, softening the edges of Mrs. Ellington's manicured garden and draping wisteria blooms across her windowsill. Inside, the overhead fan spun languidly, stirring the air into gentle eddies of jasmine and eucalyptus. By 7:20 p.m., the Maplewood Book Club members had assembled once more in the living room, now noticeably tense, as if the very walls felt the absence of nonfiction's steady hand. A stack of pastel-covered paperbacks, romance, mystery, and light fantasy lay piled on the coffee table, untouched since the last meeting. The usual plates of scones and strawberries waited half-eaten, and lemonade glasses sweated under condensation, their contents largely ignored. 19 pairs of eyes, some excited, many wary, were fixed on Janet Reynolds as she stood before the group, clipboard in hand. Janet paused, throat tight. She'd expected relief when the club first voted to ban nonfiction, but the past weeks had brought something far different. A hollowness in their discussions, arguments over trivialities, and a communal longing for the depth nonfiction once provided. Tonight's meeting was meant to be a turning point. Either recommit to fluff or face the fallout. Friends, Janet began, voice firm but hushed, thank you all for coming back on such short notice. I know our summer fiction fair has been lighter than we're used to. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the circle. She inhaled and continued, I'd like to propose we reconsider the ban on nonfiction. But rather than another vote, I want us to hear from someone uniquely qualified to speak on the matter. Murmurs filled the air. What do you mean? Miss Martinez asked, adjusting her glasses. Janet nodded to the empty chair beside Eleanor Cleary's usual spot, now conspicuously vacant. I've invited a guest speaker. She turned to the closed French doors at the rear of the room. Please welcome Ms. Eleanor Cleary. All eyes swung toward the doors as the handle clicked. Eleanor stepped inside, carrying nothing but a small, unassuming tote bag. Her gray cardigan and navy dress were as modest as ever, and her silver hair was pinned in the same neat chignon. She paused in the doorway, gathering her composure, as the circle of faces stared in baffled silence. Janet gestured to the seat. Please join us, Eleanor. Eleanor nodded, setting her tote on the side table. She sat gracefully, hands folded in her lap, and allowed the hush to settle like a gently woven shawl. Then, with unhurried calm, she reached into her tote and withdrew 2 items. First, a crisp envelope bearing the formal Maplewood Book Club logo. Second, a hardcover volume wrapped in plain brown paper. Gasps and startled exclamations rippled through the room. Mrs. Ellington's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Carver leaned forward, scholarly curiosity piqued. Even the teenagers in the back row, rare teens brave enough to attend, sat straighter, phones momentarily forgotten. Eleanor placed the envelope on the coffee table and, with deliberate care, peeled it open. She withdrew a folded paper edged with gold filigree. An official letter from Columbia University Press, emblazoned at the top with the Pulitzer Prize seal. She laid it open so that every member could see the embossed text. Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, 2022, Pulitzer Prize for Biography, Autobiography, awarded to Eleanor Cleary for Shadows of Truth. A low hum of disbelief vibrated through the circle. Eleanor then unwrapped the brown paper volume to reveal her own memoir, Shadows of Truth, its title stamped in elegant script across the spine. The muted lamplight caught the faint sheen of her name on the cover. Silence fell so complete that every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to echo like a gong. Janet rose to her feet, jaw slack. "Eleanor, you're..." Eleanor held up a gentle hand. "Please," she said, voice soft but carrying through the room. "Let me explain." She paused, eyes sweeping the circle, friend and skeptic alike. 2 years ago, I wrote Shadows of Truth to document a local scandal that nearly cost a young woman her life. I spent nights in dusty archives, days interviewing witnesses, and countless hours verifying every fact. It was an act of nonfiction, a pursuit of truth. She lifted the Pulitzer letter. "This award was never meant for display here. I never asked you to read it. But tonight you banned precisely the kind of book that gives voice to reality. And you banned me, unwittingly." Her gaze settled on Janet. "You voted to exclude nonfiction. That means you excluded me, your librarian, your friend, from your reading circle. And not just one book, but a world of stories that shape our understanding of who we are." Tears glimmered in Miss Martinez's eyes. I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." Mr. Carver rose and placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Your work has changed lives," he said, voice thick with emotion. "How could we ban that?" One by one, club members rose to their feet, Mrs. Patel wiping a tear, the younger members, faces flush with regret. Janet, choking back emotion, stepped forward and enveloped Eleanor in a hug. We were so short-sighted," she murmured. "Eleanor, will you forgive us?" Eleanor nodded, pressing her forehead against Janet's shoulder. "Of course," she said. "But let this be a lesson. Nonfiction is the backbone of empathy and understanding. Let us never again turn away from real stories." When they finally parted, Janet cleared her throat. "I move to rescind the ban on nonfiction, effective immediately. Our next meeting's selection will be Shadows of Truth." A roar of voices erupted in agreement. Chants of "Aye!" and applause filled the room like a wave unleashed. Eleanor watched as copies of her memoir were handed around, as members flipped through the initial pages, as eyes lit up at the prospect of true stories, once more guiding their discussions. Later, as the meeting transitioned to a celebration, lemonade glasses lifted in Eleanor's honor. She slipped quietly back to the reference desk the next day. The nonfiction titles awaited her return: biographies, histories, memoirs, and, at their center, her own Pulitzer-winning volume. The library hummed again with the eager murmur of patrons rediscovering nonfiction's promise. And at the heart of it, behind the reference desk, Ms. Eleanor Cleary smiled to herself. The book club had learned that reality, when given the chance, was far richer and more compelling than any fiction they could ever imagine. The first Wednesday of September brought a crispness to the air that Maplewood had not felt in months. Morning sunlight slanted through the library's arched windows, illuminating rows of nonfiction tomes as patrons filed in before the doors even opened. Behind the reference desk, Ms. Eleanor Cleary arranged a small display of her own memoir, Shadows of Truth, alongside titles recommended by the revived book club: investigative exposés, stirring biographies, and groundbreaking history volumes. At exactly 6:45 p.m., Mrs. Ellington's living room filled once more with the eager chatter of the Maplewood Book Club. Now 19 strong again, each member clutching a crisp copy of Shadows of Truth. The scones cooled on the side table, though tonight they stood untouched. The discussion promised to be far richer than any pastry. Eleanor settled into her reserved armchair, the soft leather familiar beneath her, and looked around at the bright, expectant faces. She felt a flutter of pride and gratitude, tempered by the knowledge of how precarious their bond had been. Janet Reynolds rose, her clipboard now repurposed with a single agenda: discuss Shadows of Truth and plan our fall nonfiction schedule. She smiled broadly at Eleanor. "Welcome back, Eleanor," she said, "and thank you for guiding us towards stories that matter." Applause rippled through the circle as Eleanor nodded and waited for the first question. Miss Martinez leaned forward, voice hushed. "Eleanor, your chapter on exposing that century-old municipal scandal, it was like watching a mystery unfold in real time. How did you feel the moment your research uncovered the missing witness testimony?" Eleanor took a slow breath, recalling the night she unearthed the final reveal. "I was exhilarated," she said, "but also humbled. I knew that revealing the truth could upend lives, both those who covered it up and those who had been silenced. My hope was to bring closure, not discord." As the discussion deepened, members punctuated her reflections with questions about her interview techniques, her ethical dilemmas, and the emotional toll of reliving traumatic events. The circle leaned in as she described setting the Pulitzer Committee's letter on her desk, watching the official seal gleam like a lighthouse beacon. It was validation, she admitted, but also a reminder that truth demands both courage and compassion. 2 hours slipped by like breaths. At 8:50 p.m., Janet raised her hand. "Thank you, Eleanor. Your work has reignited our passion for nonfiction. To ensure we never stray again, I propose we adopt a balanced reading calendar, alternating nonfiction and fiction each month." Heads nodded eagerly. Mr. Carver produced a penciled schedule he had prepared, mapping titles across the next 6 meetings. Everything from the hidden lives of women in war to the elegance of ghost stories. The club erupted in approval, scribbling down notes, eager to explore both factual and imaginative worlds. Later that night, as members drifted away beneath a sky splashed with stars, Eleanor lingered in the quiet living room. She gathered stray notebooks and bookmarks, each one a testament to minds awakened by real stories. Mrs. Ellington approached with a small brass key, one she had found beneath her chair. "You left this at the last meeting," she said kindly. "Hey, it unlocks my cedarwood keepsake box." Inside lay a handwritten card. "To Eleanor, our guide back to truth, thank you. May nonfiction always illuminate our path." Eleanor's eyes glistened as she tucked the key into her cardigan pocket. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning at the library, Eleanor discovered a queue of patrons waiting at the nonfiction section. Adults thumbing through newly recommended titles, teenagers snapping photos of the book club's fall schedule posted on the bulletin board, and local teachers arranging a nonfiction pop-up cafe in the community room. The nonfiction shelves, once nearly deserted, now bore witness to renewed curiosity. Behind her desk, Eleanor cataloged a donation of 30 memoirs from club members, books they had purchased in gratitude, each accompanied by a small note about how nonfiction had changed their lives. She placed one particularly slender pamphlet in a glass case beside her Pulitzer, a modest biography of a Maplewood suffragist that had captivated Mrs. Patel. As noon approached, the reference desk phone rang. A voice on the other end announced a request. "We'd like to feature Ms. Cleary's memoir in Friday's town newsletter. Maplewood's Hidden Treasure, they're calling it." Eleanor smiled, picturing the headline in the Gazette, and agreed. That evening, Club President Janet Reynolds stopped by the library with a basket of fresh-baked scones, this time for Eleanor to enjoy at the Nonfiction Pop-Up Cafe. "I thought you might like a treat while you work," Janet said. Handing over the basket, Eleanor accepted it with delight. "Thank you, Janet, for everything." She led her friend to the small community room where a circle of comfy chairs, warm tea, and nonfiction bestsellers awaited. As they settled in, Eleanor glanced around at the faces, young and old, gathered to explore true stories. In that glow of lamps and eager conversation, she felt the full weight of her journey, from silent prize winner to celebrated community guide. And as the pop-up cafe buzzed with laughter, debate, and shared wonder at the power of real stories, Eleanor Cleary closed her eyes for a moment. The hush of voices rose like a chorus of truth rediscovered, and she knew that nonfiction had reclaimed its rightful place, not just on the shelves, but in the hearts of those who believed in its power to illuminate, to heal, and to unite.